Got dust in my lungs. Hey everybody, it's your old pal Wood Doofus here. You can probably tell that one of these boxes is not like the other. In fact, this one is very plain and basic, and this one is all trimmed up and looking attractive. So this is for a bigger project that I'm working on, but I wanted to use this video to just show how I trim up a box. Now, as always, I never start with a detailed plan. I just get some basic measurements of the space I'm trying to fill, and I just kind of wing it. I also try to keep materials on hand that I can use. So I'm using this somewhat 1/4 inch material here for the first part of the trim. And I want to put the side trims on first because when I put the face frame on, I want it to be able to come over both the box material and this trim material. And when I did that box over there, every time I cut a piece to put on there, I cut another piece to put on here because they're gonna be the same. So here's what the first side is gonna look like. Let's go ahead and glue them down. So for the glue up, I like to save time. So I want the strength of this wood glue, and I'm gonna put that all around the perimeter, but I don't wanna have to clamp this down and wait for it. So I got the Starbond super fast super glue to put down the middle. And then I got some accelerator here. And that's gonna make it so it dries in about 10 to 30 seconds. You just gotta make sure you get that thing in position and don't mess it up. Otherwise, it's gonna be a major suckathon. All right, so it's been about 20 seconds and that is super strong on there. So the wood glue will dry while this Starbond stuff keeps it clamped down. Let's go ahead and get these other pieces. So all 4 pieces are tied on there, and sometimes no matter how hard you try, you're still gonna have some gaps where the joints are. So I'm just gonna use a little bit of this wood filler here, fill it in with my finger, and then sand it all down, and then go from there. So all the wood filler is in there, and so now I'm just going to use my 220 sandpaper and soften up the edges a little bit, and then we're going to get some caulk on the inside. Caulking time. This gives the end product a good look, especially since I'm doing it painted, which should be obvious considering all the shortcuts I'm taking. But you just want to get a really slim bead on there. So now it is time for the face frame. I have my top piece and my bottom piece here. I typically use a standard measurement for most of my face frames at like 1.5 inches. Unless I have some design element that makes it change, I stick with 1.5 inches standard. This bottom one's only 1 inch because it's actually going to be visible at the bottom when it's hanging on the wall. So I didn't want to have too much of an overhang there. I'm actually going to put the lip on the inside of the box and keep it flush on the bottom. Once I get those 2 nailed down, I'm going to trim the 2 side pieces down so they precisely fit in between there. All I'm doing is putting a bead of wood glue down, and then I have an 18 gauge brad nailer here with 1.25 inch nails in it. I just shaved this piece down to its final dimension. It should fit right in there super snug. And this is what I was bringing up earlier, where I wanted the face frame to cover not only the material from the box, but also the material from the side trim that we installed earlier. So now it's going to look really sharp. And as always, we are going to hit up the nail holes and the seams with a little wood filler to make sure there's no unsightly gaps. And then we're going to get to doing some round over. Now it's time to make some mess with my round over bit. I just set it just to take the edge off all the way around the inside and the outside. And I can probably avoid the top edge because I'm going to add some like crown molding type stuff up there. So here we go. Almost slipped right there. So now it's sanding time. You probably saw I told you I wasn't going to do the top edge, and I started doing the top edge. But luckily it doesn't matter because it's going to be covered up with that molding I was talking about. So once again, I'm using 220 sandpaper just to make it look real nice and smooth. So now we got the front facing towards the camera and we got the top facing up, so it's time to put on the crown molding system. So the first thing I'm going to do is put on this spacer, so that means I get to play a fun game called find all the scraps that you keep for no reason and use them for the spacer. Still got to glue these down, so let's do that. So now it's time to put this very top trim on, and I made it so it's going to hang off about 1.5 inches to make room to accept this kind of small crown molding system. And I'm going to attach the 3 pieces that go along the top with pocket holes to make sure they stay flush while I connect it. So I have an 1.5 inch spacer block that was a cutoff that I'm using to make sure the overhang on the 2 sides are even, and I know the overhang on my front is good because these back pieces just come flush to the back. So once that's in place, I'm going to go ahead and mark where this is supposed to be, especially on these 2 corners. And then I'm going to pick it up, put the glue down, put it back down where my lines are, and nail it down. Now that is in place, it's that magic time to do the round over again on the top and bottom edge of this part. So we have the front side facing up again, and the last part is going to be the trickiest part, which is this crown molding. I put the bigger bumpy part on the top on the other ones. That's what I'm doing here. I think that's pretty standard. So I'm going to cut the long piece first. I have just enough of this stuff to get this right one time. So I'm going to cut one side, and then I'm going to cut the other side a little bit long. So when I cut the 2 short pieces, I'll sneak up on that connection and make sure it's a tight fit. Looking at it upside down, that might be confusing, but basically we want to mark the direction of the cut here, which is going to keep me from getting confused. And when I cut this on the miter saw, I'm going to make sure I put this top part on the bottom. Ooh, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Yeah, so this top part's going to be on the bottom of my miter saw. You know what, let's just do it. So here we are at the miter saw, and as you can see, it's already set to a 45 degrees. I have the angle and direction of my cut marked just to keep my mind straight about which way the cut's going. Now this is going to be the top, and the top is on the bottom. Don't ask me why, it just is. This is going to be an awkward cut because I'm left-handed and I got to go across like this. I have 2 45s on the back here, and I need to make sure they're flush with this part and this part in order to get that cut right. So I just make sure that's positioned right, and I make the cut. Oh, you can't see anything. Oh yeah, you can. All right, so it looks like I got my first cut done correctly. So now I have another mating piece to come up in this direction, but I want to cut the other side of this long one first. And like I say, I'm going to cut it a little long so I can sneak back down. All right, so I got my long piece cut on both ends, a little long, and now it's time to cut my first mating piece. So I want to cut the angle first and then cut my flat side down on the other end after I get this. So I want to make sure I mark the direction that this cut's going to be, so I don't get confused. And once again, I'm going to put the top down on the miter saw and make that cut. So I have my mating piece cut here, but I'm I feel like one of them's not quite right. So what I might do is take this one that I just cut and maybe trim it and see if I can get it a little bit better. Otherwise, I'll just make do with what I got. All right, I cut it again, and I think they do mate up pretty well. It might be the surface that I have here being slightly uneven. So I'll make sure I glue the joint together before I anchor the pieces down to the box itself. Right now I want to hold those two together and go ahead and mark the flat end for cutting. Now that I got this piece cut to size, I want to match it up as best I can and go ahead and pin it down so I got something stationary. I don't have a stupid battery in my thing. Over here on the other end, I have made the mating cut for this side, and I'm able to push my big piece against the other side for spacing purposes. And once again, I cut that piece a little bit long, so now I can actually match them up and kind of determine how much I need to cut off. And I just want to shave off like half a kerf at a time until I get that mating piece just right. All right, I really thought I was gonna have to do 3 cuts, but it looks like 2 was the magic number to get it just right. So now what I wanna do, I need to cut this one to size. But once I do that, I wanna glue the joints together first with some super glue and then start pinning the whole thing down. And that way the joints will hopefully have a good connection. Super glue time. Got my accelerator and my super glue. I'll put super glue on the one that's anchored in, and I'm going to put my accelerator on the mating piece. And I'm going to stick them together the best that I can. But I'm going to have to fill that gap with some wood filler and then a light sanding around the edges, and it should look good. Now that is glued, we'll go ahead and do at least one nail here. And that is in place. We're just doing the same thing, though it's not a huge deal. Gonna put super glue on this piece, accelerant on this piece, and we're gonna mate them together. Shoot, come on. There we go. It's really nerve-wracking when you only have a little bit of time. I'm gonna go ahead and get this one in there. Run out of hands that work. Here we go. Let's go ahead and get one there. Not too shabby. I put a little wood filler in my gaps and in my nail holes, and I got a little file here. And I'm just gonna very carefully go around some of the sharper edges. Just take off the sharp edge. The last touch we're gonna do is just a little bit of caulk along this top seam, and then we'll be ready for painting once everything dries anyway. So here we are with 2 nicely bookended matching boxes. They're nicely trimmed up boxes, but boxes nonetheless. And that's what woodworking is sometimes, just making boxes look nice. So these are ready for paint. I'm just gonna put a coat of primer on with a small roller, and then I'm gonna put 2 coats of white paint on there, and then we'll be done.